This is what we like to see. What if Sony actually invested in Bungie instead of decimating it? This is an interesting question that's posed here. This is what I've been talking about, which is I would like to see the ability to scale Bungie up and make Destiny a bigger franchise, obviously make it more successful. Now, if that was possible before, I'm sure Bungie would do it. I mean, everyone wants their flagship game, especially when you're a one game studio. You want your game to be as successful as possible. I would assume at least that the ROI just wasn't there, that they weren't making enough money to continuously scale Destiny up and hire more employees, which is why they conversely laid a bunch of people off. Now, there are conflicting reports and information where, you got like Chris Barrett, who was fired for SA allegations, right? Being owed something like $80 million from his Sony acquisition. So from that, we know that like those high up Bungie people, when they were purchased by Sony, they were paid like the sum of like about $100 million, right? So that's $100 million to a lot of different individuals. That adds up fast. Could they have not made so much money and instead used it to scale Destiny 2? Perhaps. I think that's where a lot of the criticism comes to Pete Parsons and his lofty car collection. But let's jump in here. Let's see what Sony will do now and some of the theories that are being posed by Paul Tassi here. All right. Sony bought Bungie for $3.6 billion with entirely unreasonable expectations. Yes, they thought that they were going to be the game in the studio that would deliver them the salvation they needed. They wanted that live service messiah to help Sony compete against the other live service juggernauts. Okay, they were screaming Lisan al Gaib. That was what Bungie was to them. They needed the savior to come in, but unfortunately they were not the savior. The plan, it seems, was the assumption that A, Destiny 2 was given in terms of printing money indefinitely. Yeah. And B, whatever Bungie made next, namely Marathon, was sure to be a breakout hit, right? That's leaning back on that Bungie magic motto that they have within their studio, that everything they touch turns to gold. Obviously, they made Halo, and that was incredible. They moved on and made Destiny, also incredible. Destiny 2, not so much initially, but they fixed it. They course corrected. So they basically have a track record of, win, win, win. So of course you would think, if they're going to do a fourth game, in this current climate, surely it would be a win. But fortunately, Marathon is at least not shaping up to that so far in its reputation. Now, there have been some secret playtests and people have been saying good things. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. Only time will tell with Marathon. C, Bungie could mentor a half dozen big Sony single-player studios in terms of how to make and run a successful live service game. True, this is back to the live service insanity where every game is trying to pivot and transition into this live service model just because it's simply significantly more lucrative, right? The box product, it makes a lot of money initially, but the problem is that you take that money and you have to reinvest it back in, pay all of these devs, and then you run the risk of the sequel game just completely doing nothing compared to its original, right? To its predecessor. So your box product is like you deliver a game and then 3 years later, whatever, 5 years later, you deliver the sequel, and then another 3 years later, the sequel, and then, you're on to the iteration, the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, etc. Or if you're like Call of Duty for a period of time, they just had a new game every year and they just bounced between two studios. They're like, I think it was Treyarch and Treyarch and Activision. They're going back and forth each year. One would come out with a Call of Duty and then the other would come out with a Call of Duty. And so it kept a really crazy fast pace. And if you were online during that time, it was actually a really fun time during those initial years of being a COD player. But now we're in a whole different era. It's insane to think that they believe they would all play out exactly as expected. I think that it is insane that they believe that, but I also think that they really didn't have any other card to play. I think that it was Sony was going to purchase Bungie, or Bungie would maybe just completely fold, I imagine, because Microsoft, we know now, did not want them. Like Bungie went to Microsoft and said, "Hey, buddy, how you doing? How's that Halo doing? Fuck off, we're not interested in buying you guys. You guys have way too high of a burnout rate. We're not interested." So then obviously Bungie was left to, drag tail back over to Papa Sony and see what offer they could get made with that situation. It was well known that Destiny 2's huge Light and Darkness saga was about to end with the final shape, and sapping resources from the game world would result in less content and, of course, fewer players thereafter. This is true for sure. I was kind of expecting I mean, maybe this is bad storytelling, and feel free to roast me if you think it, but I was kind of expecting the Light and Darkness saga to be like this. It was like these big cosmic events, but then I thought it would like zoom out, you know? And instead of like the Traveler and the Darkness being these like massive cosmic entities, that there would be something much bigger, and that the Traveler is just a pawn in a much bigger chess match being played, right? Like I thought that was, that the Light and Darkness saga would maybe not necessarily end, but that we would find out that the Light and Darkness saga was much small, is a much smaller piece to a bigger puzzle. I didn't necessarily think of it needing to come to an end. Maybe that's bad storytelling where it's just, the next thing and then the next thing and then the next thing and there's no resolution, right? It could be a bit unsatisfying, but considering it's a live service game and it's meant to go on year after year after year after year, you probably don't want to have a definitive end to your narrative, because then people definitively choose that point in time to say, well, I'm done with the game now. And that's kind of what we've seen with the final shape, unfortunately, with the population. The population has fallen off a cliff, right? We've talked about the population a ton, though, so we won't beat a dead horse here too much. Regardless of Marathon's current or future quality, expecting that any multiplayer game, especially one that's a new, quote unquote new, IP, can most definitely explode into the market is not remotely reflected by reality. This is actually such a good point from Paul Tassi here, because right now we are seeing a lot of games being heavily criticized, and it's probably the hardest time right now to launch a game than ever before, because there's such a big catalog of games that we compare it to. And so as soon as a game comes out, we're like, oh yeah, that's like that game and like that game, and that has mechanics from that game, and yeah, it's exactly like that one. And that game from 17 years ago, it's the exact same art style of that. And we just compare it to like all this crazy catalog, and the current existing games have been so well established and developed, and they have so much money funneling into them that their servers are fucking insane. They've got crazy good dedicated servers. You're always connecting. You're always live. They've got crazy updates. There's new stuff's always happening in the game. The game is fucking free somehow. I don't even know how they can even afford this shit, but they can somehow with microtransactions and crazy brand deals and all of that. They're able to pull off the game to be free, always online, crazy servers, always updates, new characters, new guns, new abilities, new this, new that, new cosmetics. Games in this day and age, it's so hard to get started, because it's so difficult to break into such a deep industry. I equate it to, a small business trying to launch a new car business, right? Like imagine you wanted to start a new car business. That's going to be significantly harder than starting a restaurant. They're both starting new businesses. You start a restaurant, that's a new business. You start a new car company, that's a new business. But the amount of capital required, the amount of, sheer investment to even get past like the first month is insane. You have to buy a fucking massive warehouse. You have to have all these parts and all these employees and all this manufacturing just to get to shipping, and then you're going to be at a massive loss for like probably years before you even come close to breaking even, by like millions and millions of dollars, unless you already have millions and millions of dollars put into it. And that's kind of what we're at with gaming, right? Gaming is like starting a new car company in this day and age, and it used to be 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it used to be like starting a new restaurant. Anyone can start a restaurant. You just, as long as you know how to cook, I guess. There is no magic button in terms of how to make a successful live service either. This is true. There's no one has the secret ingredients. Anyone that's like, oh, this company, they always make good live service. That's no one does that. No one does that. Other than I guess maybe Take-Two with their GTA and stuff, but they're kind of staying in the same genre. Like if Take-Two and Rockstar, they tried to make like other live service games, I guarantee you, out of the 10 games they make, at least half of those fail at this rate. Like live service games are squandering and struggling for sure. In the most famous example, Bungie consulted with Naughty Dog about their Factions multiplayer game. They explained to them the type of commitment it would take to make and maintain something like that, and Naughty Dog just didn't want to do it in favor of their own bread and butter. Yes, they were just like, so you're telling me we're just going to, embrace a culture of perpetual crunch and insanity, and Matt, maybe we'll just stick to the Bucks product thing. Maybe we'll stay in our lane. Yeah. So it was canceled, and Bungie was blamed despite consulting the exact way they're supposed to. Wow, I didn't even realize that Bungie was blamed for this, and they were actually criticized or roasted, I guess. Obviously, investors, they want They want these live service games, right? Here's the thing. Once you have the IP established, think about it like this. Once the IP is established for Destiny, for Crash Bandicoot, whatever it is, the characters, the art style, it's established. You're either going to continuously update the existing game and make money along the way, or you're going to do the box product thing, which gives you a little bit more of breathing room, but it's also risky because people could just forget about your game, move on to other games. Maybe you launch that new game and it doesn't land as well as you'd like. Whereas live service kind of has like a pulse to it. It has like a heartbeat. And every day it's pumping in players and you can watch it. And that's why we look at these charts. I know these charts, you might be getting a little bit tired of looking at these charts at this point, right? Between the Destiny 2 Steam charts, the popularity report, this is the heartbeat. This is the lifeblood of every live service game. And obviously it's a little bit unfair to compare it to box product, but it is also important to compare it to some degree to compare box product to box product, because it at least lets you know how popular a game is doing, how much ROI they're getting, how much money they're recouping from the investment that they're putting forward. And the conclusion in the wider market has always been, don't force talented single player game studios to make multiplayer games. So there's kind of a culture war that's happening within these gaming studios where the greedy investors that, just want to capitalize and make as much money as possible, they just want to push these single player game studios to like, hey, it's time to make the multiplayer games. And this is maybe an unfortunate byproduct of capitalism in general, but it's basically just this principle of if you don't, they will, right? So if you don't want to make your single player game a live service game, some other game studio will come along. They'll have a similar IP. They'll steal your audience. They'll steal your idea. They'll rebrand it. It'll be Crash Bandicoot, but he's, orange instead, right? And then they're going to have live service and everyone will jump ship and play that game. And then they'll be in that game playing regularly and they'll forget about you, right? That's kind of the thought process that's put into this. Live service is the peak, the pinnacle, and this, single player or these box product games, they're legacy. That's the way we used to do things. We're trying to get as much into the live service as possible, at least from a business standpoint. And this was aligned with that. Bungie has endured cut after cut, even in the wake of a successful make or break launch, like the Final Shape, which did extremely well. I actually still believe that the Final Shape was a 10 out of 10 in its initial launch that first month. If you were there, you got to experience peak Destiny. It was so good. I really enjoyed the Final Shape. And it would appear as though it didn't have the best ROI. Like they had to do layoffs very shortly afterwards. So clearly they hired way more employees than they could maintain. They paid them, obviously. And then when Final Shape was done, even though it did really well in terms of where it should have, it hit, 1.8 million people on day one, right? It still just didn't hit the ROI necessary. I think that Bungie has like just really high overall costs, like to make the art in the game. They have like hired like all these like hundreds of artists, hundreds of artists. And they all have $110,000 annual salary. And the art of Destiny 2 is incredible, of course, it's amazing, but it creates really high costs. There's high overhead for everything. It's hard to even do anything in Destiny 2 without it being just ridiculously expensive, which put up player count records after 10 years of the series' existence. Did it put up player count records? Let me see here. I don't know if this was records. It was, it was 1.8, which is comparable to Lightfall and Witch Queen, and Beyond Light. It was just where it should have been. I don't know if it was necessarily record breaking. It definitely hit some record breaking lows a few months later, but we're not going to jump into that. Instead of continuing to drive momentum from there, Bungie has been slashed multiple times to the point where the amount of content the much smaller team can put out is not pleasing its player base, which is fleeing rapidly. This is an expert analysis. I strongly agree with this sentiment, and I cannot say it enough. And the most unfortunate part about it is I don't know if there's really necessarily a fix other than Sony hiring more people. Like if Sony's like, hey, maybe we hire some more people, we give this game a chance, it'll be wildly successful. I don't know. I don't know if we're going to be able to convince them. I don't know if the money makes sense. I don't know if the ROI is there, right? I think that Bungie's overall cost is just a little like this game is just too expensive to make. We went for crazy graphic realism. We hired all these hundreds of artists. We got too deep in the art that we're unable to have meaningful content come into the game anymore, which is why that could be a very valid argument for Destiny 3. But again, that poses its own problems. Second, the $3.6 billion deal was structured so a number of executives or long-serving Bungie vets would get millions, if not tens of millions. That's what I'm saying, tens of millions. I think Pete Parsons made about $100 million from this deal. I think when this deal was signed, it was not initially, like he didn't like get a check written for $100 million, but over the course of completing all of his objectives, he was able to accomplish his $100 million goal. And I think that's why he stayed even after the massive backlash of the second wave of layoffs, because he knew that leaving would cost him, like, it cost Christopher Barrett $80 million to get kicked out, right? Christopher Barrett gets kicked out for SA allegations. It cost him $80 million that he was owed from this deal. So if Pete Parsons left when he did, it would have cost him, if consuming he has the same amount of equity in Bungie stock, which he probably did, at least comparable, could have cost him anywhere from 50 million. Maybe he has less. Maybe it cost him 10 million. Who knows? When they're part of the deal vested after a few years, that may be fair given their history and the size of the sale, but it has also bred complacency, which is apparent within the company as they just sat around and waited for the payout. That's the biggest criticism of Pete. Like I said, he just sat around, he waited for the payout, he let the reputation of the company dwindle. I think that right after the second round of layoffs, he should have been like a captain goes down with his ship and said, you know, I failed you guys. I apologize. I'm going to step down from my role. I want, you know, Justin Truman to do the job that I couldn't do and do a better job. You know, you guys deserve better. That would have been awesome. That community sentiment would have been incredible. Pete would have left a hero, right? Instead, Pete left literally the supervillain of the story, okay? Pete became the witness of the story, right? He left as the fucking villain, dude. And that narrative stays to this very day. Some of the best leaders Bungie has had lately were not veterans, but given the state of everything, most have moved on rather quickly, which is why we need some of those OGs back, all right? Where's Joe at? Joe Blackburn, please, for the love of all that is good, okay? We'll throw you a bag, okay? I'll start buying shit in Eververse if Joe Blackburn comes back. Whether anyone wants to admit it or not, Bungie is still Sony's best shot at making a mark in the live service space. Nope, Helldivers. We're the redheaded stepchild, okay? Sony, their golden baby is Helldivers. Yes, the biggest success recently is Helldivers 2. Okay, good. We're addressing the elephant in the room here. But Arrowhead is bailing from the Sony partnership for their next game, which they will self-publish. Okay. Have we not learned anything from Bungie? Okay. You don't leave. Okay. You don't leave. Okay. You think you're so good. This is what happens with these gaming companies. They start making a good game. They start to think, hey, their shit don't stink. They can do it all themselves. They're going to self-publish. They're going to free themselves from the shackles of Sony, Microsoft, whatever, and then everything's going to be so good for them. This usually doesn't work out, though. All right, we'll see, though. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they do have the magic sauce, and they're going to figure it out as a self-publishing company. Sony has run into the wall after wall with its live offerings. Concord is the biggest failure of a game launch of all time, no exaggeration. $400 million. Let that sink in. $400 million. That is an insane amount of money to burn. Over all those years, paying all those devs $100,000 salaries for years or more, right? For that shit game to launch and just have no one play it and no marketing, and then just to cancel it shortly afterwards, refund everyone. What a crazy time. Marathon, not that it's going to be the same thing, surely has had a similar amount of money invested into it. I don't know if it's 400 million. It could be more, it could be less. There's no estimations. There's no way of knowing the exact amount. I would assume that it has a comparable amount, though, to Concord. We'll see what happens with Marathon. We'll see if it's successful. Like I said, people are playtesting it right now in secrecy. They got the craziest NDA secrecy. You aren't getting in there. You are not sharing a clip of this thing. You're not talking about this. Nothing, dude. They got the craziest ironclad NDA. It's like fucking Fort Knox in there, okay? Some people tried to stream it, right? Like those guys that broke into the Louvre. They tried to stream it and they got their shit shut down immediately. It's not happening. There's almost zero chance something like Fair Games is actually releasing with that studio falling apart. So yes, almost by default, Bungie is still the best. They're at least the most storied, right? They're the most well-developed live service studio underneath the umbrella, the ones that can give them maybe the best long-term experience, right? But is there really any sort of magic to live service? Like, let's be real, I think that Bungie, without roasting them too bad, I feel like they kind of just fell into the success of live service. I don't know that they necessarily engineered it. You know what I'm saying? Like, I would be way more impressed if Bungie launched a super successful Destiny 2 box product and they were just like, you know what? Let's be fucking galaxy brains right now and let's just make this fucking thing live service, dude. And then they took a successful game and then just launched it into the stratosphere. That would be way more impressive to me. Instead, it was like they had no choice. They were literally here. They're like rock bottom. They were like, we're 1 month away from shuttering the fucking game. So like we have to do something drastic. We have to do something that it is unprecedented. And they're like, fuck it, dude. We are going to crunch like a motherfucker and we are going to put all hands on deck and we're going to turn this box product into a live service and see what the fuck happens. And they did, and it was a massive success. And then they just kept riding that success and they were like way ahead of the curve, you know, way before everyone else, right? And you see this in every industry. Every industry that exists out there, you will see the same pattern where the first people into the space become like the juggernaut. And it's like very difficult to surpass them in some way. I'll give you a good example. Twitch, right? Twitch is like the first onto the scene for live streaming, you know, and they built up such a core cult audience. So hard for YouTube and, you know, Mixer, which failed, right? You have, obviously, there's other live streaming platforms out there. Kick right now, lots of others, right? All trying to get a piece of that pie, but Twitch is still way ahead of all of them. Netflix, right? Netflix is iconic for their live streaming platform. They were way ahead of everyone. Netflix was first. Now there's like Paramount and Hulu and Disney Plus and like all these other live streaming platforms trying to get a piece of the pie. But if you're there first, you're way ahead of the race. So that's kind of where Bungie was at. They were there way ahead of most people. They were ahead of the curve with live service. And it was because of their failure more than anything. They failed so bad with box product that they just had to pivot to something super drastic and crazy, and it worked out. And honestly, kudos to them. It turned their company, which was worth whatever here, I don't even know, who knows what the evaluation would be at this point, to here, their evaluation was 3.6 billion. Like, goddamn. In that span of time, you made it from basically closing the doors to 3.6 billion. That's crazy. That just doesn't happen. You know, most businesses that are dying don't 4 years later sell their company for 3.6 billion, right? Obviously, Destiny 2 is still declining in quality to this day. Yes, we're looking at you, soft locks. But at least a large chunk of that is the slashing of resources and revenue demands from the game. Fewer devs make less content, correct? Decimating QA means more bugs more often. Shout out to Eduardo, the one only QA guy. I joke. I'm sure there's more than just Eduardo, but that meme still just kills me that he's the one QA guy. And that was from him posting it too, not me. And overall, the lack of any breathing room for Destiny to take a break and come back with a game that would be a successful several years down the road. Destiny 3 is a huge issue. We might get Destiny 2. Imagine if Destiny 2 crashes and burns so bad that the only idea is to just invest in a Destiny 3. The problem is that period of time between Destiny 2 and then Destiny 3 getting developed, it's going to take like 5 years to make Destiny 3. So we're going to spend like, 5 years doing what? What are we going to do for 5 years? You know, it's going to be insane. Destiny 3 launches in 2030. I don't know if I'm ready to take a 5-year Destiny break. I don't know if I'm going to come back after 5 years, right? Who knows what's going to be out by then? Sony gives Naughty Dog 5 years to make a new 40-hour game. Why does Destiny have to be ground into dust as a series with no time to regroup and truly evolve? As for Marathon, I have my doubts about its future, but Sony cannot pull another Concord here, no matter what. This is true. And I'm very skeptical of Marathon. I was skeptical before the art stuff. I feel like people always point to the art stuff and say, haha, art theft, idiots, you know, and that's fine. But the art theft stuff is over and done with, right? That's Anti-Real probably got paid a massive bag. Sure, I paid probably millions of dollars, right? And so that's over and done with. Now let's just talk about the actual game. Will this game do well? Does this game have 2 feet to stand on? Will this game launch well? And even before all of that, I was very skeptical, and I was not, you know, it has like the opposite energy of Arc Raiders, which is another game coming out in the same space, which Marathon was meant to undercut Arc Raiders, and it was meant to Marathon was meant to be out for like a month already by now. And in doing so, it would build its audience before Arc Raiders would swoop in, presumably, and scoop up a lot of these extraction shooter players or new players, etc. And Arc Raiders has like a 10-year plan. They literally have the D1, the Destiny OG, the 10-year plan. That's what they claim. We haven't heard any fancy talk like that about Marathon. So we cannot help but feel like the confidence isn't there. The commitment isn't there. We saw the sad live stream. They were like practically crying on the live stream. It was bad, right? It was not a good look. It's hard to be confident in what Marathon has given us thus far. That being said, I'm still going to judge everything based on its own merit. So like when they do show us more Marathon gameplay, I'm going to judge it based on that alone. I'm going to compare it to Arc Raiders. It's going to be compared to Tarkov, etc. And we'll see. We'll see what they can pull off. It's going to require a crazy marketing budget, though. Let's be real here. With all the negative PR, they're going to have to pump in an ungodly amount of money marketing and building a positive PR around this game. It's going to be incredible to see. You're going to see Marathon ads everywhere, Marathon ads on every site if they're going to try and pull this off. No matter the initial player count, Marathon has to be given time to grow, learn, evolve, and add new content over time. True, it's already done so between alphas, and it's easy to see potential for it to expand even beyond just the extraction genre if given the time and resources to do so. It's possible, right? I mean, we're talking about the Halo team, at least some of the Halo team, some of the Destiny team working on a new IP. You would think that they have the possibilities there. You bought Bungie for $3.6 billion, have demanded unreasonable things from them, and hacked away at their ability to build anything. This is not excusing leadership laziness or a large number of mistakes devs themselves have made, but Sony's role in all of this has been almost nothing but negative. And I have to wonder what might happen if they threw more resources at Bungie rather than taking them away constantly. So this is an interesting way of framing the situation where kind of pointing the finger at Sony and saying, you need to give them more opportunities. You need to give them more breathing room, help build up the dev team, which is perfectly fine if that's the way Paul Tassi wants to frame it and see things. I kind of have a different opinion about the way things went down to a certain degree. I feel like what happened is that Bungie's best and brightest aren't really there anymore. Let's be real. A lot of them have left. Some of the best ones, some of the ones that created some of the best content. Also, some of the ones that created some of the worst content, right? The people that made Gambit aren't there anymore, right? Obviously, no one's been working on Gambit for a long time. We know that for a fact. But some of the best content as well, and the people who made it are gone. And, they got that Sony deal and they took the bag and they ran. Let's be real. The Bungie's best and brightest got that bag from Sony and they ran. They left, they got out of there. They did not like the culture. They didn't like the direction of the studio. They may not have been a fan of Marathon at all. Who knows what, but a lot of them have left. And I struggle to find someone that I can attach an association with as strong as some of those iconic people, like Joe Blackburn comes to mind. And I have like a palpable feeling of like, this guy fucking likes this game, bro. This guy wants this game to do well. Like I can tell that this guy is a fucking raider. You know what I'm saying? I could tell this guy, the gears are turning and he wants Destiny's raids and all. He's putting in all his time. I could just see it in him, right? Luke Smith, the same. Christopher Barrett, the same. These guys, Mark Noseworthy, these guys, you could tell that there's something that they're doing something right. I'm trying to point to someone currently at Bungie, and I'm like, that's the fucking guy or girl or whatever, right? I just don't see it. It doesn't look good for the future, unfortunately. I hope I'm wrong, though. I hope I'm pleasantly surprised. I hope Renegades launches super successful, breaks records. Bungie is back. They hire more people. They develop a whole new saga. The Fate saga builds upon the momentum of Renegades. And we look back at this time as this like crazy dark era, just like we look back at Curse of Osiris, right? We look back here and we're like, holy shit, dude, this was dark times, dude, dark times, but thankfully we're not there anymore, Hopefully we look back at this Edge of Fate era and we're like, God damn, it was bad. It was bad, Like we're some kind of fucking war veterans, that survived 2 tours. I survived 2 tours of Destiny 2. We're looking back at the dark ages, and maybe this will be something of the past, but it's hard to be optimistic in everything that's happened, right? It's hard to be optimistic. I think the biggest thing is just a lot less devs is objectively worse for any game, right? If let's say a good example, if you heard that, they're working on GTA 6 or GTA 7 in a few years from now, and you're like, okay, Rockstar's working on it, but because of the success of GTA 6, they only can have half the dev team to work on GTA 7, right? You wouldn't be like super stoked. You wouldn't be like, hell yeah, dude, that's going to be fire. You'd be like, what? Like they had to lay off half the devs for GTA 7. It's not going to be as good. It's not going to be as big as some crazy, like, there's just a natural correlation, right? There's just a natural level of disappointment, So I think for Destiny, it's going to come back to, can we get more devs on this project? Can we get more people? That's up to Sony. And is the ROI worth it? Or are we going to look back at these as the golden age, Are we going to look back and be like, dude, this was the shit right here. If you lived here, If you lived from Forsaken, Shadowkeep, Beyond Light, Witch Queen, Lightfall, and Final to right here, okay? Right here. If you lived in this time, you experienced peak Destiny years, bro. You got to live it. But if you didn't, then you missed out on it, you know? Let me know what you think down in the comments below.